You know, I always thought infidelity was something that happened to other people. The kind of thing you'd see on a soap opera or overhear during a scandalous conversation at a dinner party. But not me. I was the guy who thought he had a handle on life. A stable job, a decent house, a beautiful wife Emma, and the kind of neighborly rapport that usually only exists in sitcoms. Well, it was stable until recently. It started small. As these things often do. You don't notice the first few cracks in the foundation until they start to spiderweb across the walls. It was an offhand comment from Emma that did it, something so innocent, yet so oddly pointed that it made my internal radar beep for the first time. "Oh, Alan's been really helpful with the lawnmower," she said one morning while sipping coffee at the kitchen counter. Alan, the neighbor. Alan, the perpetually shirtless neighbor with the chiseled jawline and tan that could make you believe he spent more time posing for catalogs than doing actual work. Alan, whose wife conveniently moved out 6 months ago after what was probably one too many, working late nights on both ends. The neighborhood gossips had had a field day with that one. I hadn't given it much thought until that day, standing in the kitchen, watching Emma talk about Alan like he was the second coming of yard maintenance. "Since when do you care about lawnmowers?" I had joked, raising an eyebrow. Emma was more into Pinterest crafts and true crime podcasts than she was into tools. She gave me one of those thin smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes and went back to scrolling through her phone. That was the first blip. The second was more noticeable, a little harder to write off. One evening, about a week later, I came home from work a bit earlier than usual. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the washing machine and the faint sound of someone laughing next door. Emma wasn't in the living room or the kitchen. I wandered upstairs, figuring she might be taking a nap or working on some project. That's when I heard her voice, low and muffled, coming from the bedroom. I paused outside the door. It wasn't the words that made me stop, but the tone. The kind of tone you use when you're flirting? I could only make out a few phrases, something about plans for the weekend and an excited giggle that was just a bit too enthusiastic. I opened the door to find Emma lounging on the bed, her phone pressed to her ear. She jumped, startled by my entrance, and shot me a wide-eyed look that was both surprised and slightly guilty. But she recovered quickly. "Hey, hon! I didn't hear you come in," she said, smiling. Too big of a smile. "Who were you talking to?" I asked, doing my best to sound casual, though my stomach was starting to twist in that unpleasant way it does when you know something's wrong but can't quite put your finger on it. "Just my sister," she said quickly, too quickly. "We were talking about this new restaurant downtown." "Ah." I nodded, glancing at the phone still in her hand. I didn't press her on it, didn't ask to see the call log. What kind of man demands to see his wife's phone like some kind of paranoid tyrant? But still, something didn't sit right. The third blip came when I noticed her wardrobe change. Now, Emma's always had great taste, but lately it was like she was dressing for a different kind of attention. Shorter skirts, lower necklines, and she was spending an inordinate amount of time getting ready before she even went to the grocery store. Then there were the gym trips daily, sometimes even twice a day. Not that I was complaining about her newfound dedication to fitness, but Emma had never been a gym bunny. She preferred yoga at home with a glass of wine. I brushed it off at first. Maybe she just wanted to feel good about herself. Who was I to question my wife's desire to look her best? But every time I'd catch her glancing out the window toward Alan's place, my stomach would do that little twist again. Alan, of course, was always around. Always in the yard, always waving over when Emma stepped outside. He had this smile, this infuriating, cocky grin that made me want to punch him in the face, and then immediately feel bad about it because he'd probably thank me for the attention. I wasn't the jealous type, at least I didn't think I was, but something about his easygoing charm rubbed me the wrong way, especially when Emma started spending more and more time outside. Watering the plants, as she claimed, But how much watering do daisies really need? Then came the texts. Now, I hadn't meant to snoop. I'm not that guy. But when your wife leaves her phone out on the kitchen counter, buzzing nonstop, and you just so happen to glance down, well, it's hard not to look. The messages were from Alan, of course. I didn't see much, just enough to make the blood in my veins go cold. Thanks for the help earlier, you're a lifesaver. I'm around tonight if you need anything. Winky faces? The bastard was using winky faces. It could have been innocent, I told myself. Maybe they really were just talking about lawnmowers or some other inane suburban topic. But I knew better. Emma had never used winky faces with me, and I was her husband. I started noticing little things after that. Like how she always took her phone with her when she left a room, or how she'd get defensive when I asked about her day. There was a nervous energy about her, like she was trying too hard to act normal. And that's when it hit me, she was hiding something. Something big. But here's the thing. I'm not one to fly off the handle without proof. No, I'm much more calculated than that. Years in the corporate world had taught me the value of patience and observation. So, instead of confronting her in a jealous rage or spiraling into a pit of despair, I decided to play it smart. If Emma was cheating on me with Alan, I'd catch her. And not just in any old way, no, I'd devise a plan so foolproof, so airtight, that there would be no doubt, no wiggle room, and no denying it. I'd catch them red-handed. But not yet. First, I needed to gather evidence. Solid evidence. That's when I started setting up my operation. I'll admit, there was a certain thrill in it. Like I was some sort of undercover detective on the cusp of cracking a case. I started by studying their habits. Emma and Alan weren't exactly subtle about their interactions, once I knew what to look for. I'd see them chatting over the fence, or she'd accidentally bump into him while taking out the trash. And Alan? That man knew exactly what he was doing. His glances weren't casual, they were calculated. The kind of look that says, yeah, I know I'm good looking, and I know she's into me. I decided to install a small camera on the back porch, nothing too fancy, just something to monitor their little encounters. I positioned it to capture the fence line between our yard and Alan's, where they'd often meet to chat. Then, I got myself a second phone. A burner, like something out of a spy movie. I used it to create a fake social media account that would allow me to monitor Emma's online activity without her knowing. I wasn't proud of it, but desperate times and all that. Days turned into weeks, and the evidence began to pile up. The late-night messages, the glances, the hushed conversations when they thought no one was listening. It was all coming together. But still, I waited. Timing was everything. One afternoon, I came home early again, this time more deliberate in my approach. I wanted to catch them in the act, but not too early, just enough to rattle them. Emma's car was in the driveway, but the house was oddly quiet. I headed upstairs, the familiar knot tightening in my stomach. When I reached the bedroom, I found the bed neatly made, but something was off. The window was open, just a crack, and there was a faint scent in the air, Alan's cologne. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. I checked my phone, the one connected to the back porch camera, and saw exactly what I expected, Emma, standing by the fence, talking to Alan. And they were closer than usual. Much closer. I could have stormed out right then, could have confronted them and had the dramatic shouting match that I'd been imagining in my head for weeks. But no. That would have been too easy for them. Too quick. I wanted more than that. I wanted them to feel the slow burn of realization, the dawning horror that they'd been caught in a web they didn't even know existed. And so, I smiled to myself and walked downstairs, out of the house, and into my car. The trap was almost set. Now, it was time to prepare for the final act. After all, why ruin a good plan when you're this close to checkmate? Chapter 2: The Devil's in the Details. The key to a perfect plan isn't just timing, it's patience. If you're going to catch someone red-handed, you don't rush it. No, you wait until they feel safe, until they think they've gotten away with it. Then you spring the trap. It's a beautiful thing, really, watching it unfold. That's where I found myself after weeks of subtle observation and carefully planted bait, on the verge of setting the perfect trap for Emma and her oh-so-charming partner in crime, Alan. But to do this right, I needed more than just suspicions. I needed a flawless setup, and more importantly, I needed to play the long game. I started by creating the illusion that I was backing off. No more early returns from work, no more prying questions about Emma's day or her newfound enthusiasm for the gym. I'd smile, kiss her goodbye in the mornings, and come home late, giving her all the space she needed to continue whatever it was she was doing with Alan. The less suspicious I seemed, the more comfortable she'd get. And the more comfortable she got, the more careless she'd become. But I wasn't just sitting idly by. I had work to do. The camera on the back porch was already paying off in spades. Every few days, I'd check the footage and watch as Emma and Alan stood a little too close by the fence, whispering in low voices and sharing conspiratorial smiles. It was infuriating, sure, but also satisfying. Because I knew what they didn't, that they were being watched. That every smirk, every winky face, every little secret was being catalogued for later use. But I wasn't going to stop at just cameras. No, this was going to be bigger than a simple gotcha moment. I wanted them to feel the full weight of their betrayal, and I wanted to savor every moment of their downfall. I started phase 2 of the plan by planting subtle clues that would lead Emma to believe I was completely out of the picture for a weekend. A business trip was the perfect cover. Conveniently, my company had a yearly out-of-town conference that I could easily use as an excuse. I made sure to mention it in passing one evening, while we were both pretending to enjoy one of those pre-packaged frozen meals that had become the norm lately. "So, the conference is coming up," I said, stabbing at my overly bland chicken. "I'll be gone all weekend, Friday through Sunday." Emma barely looked up from her phone, scrolling mindlessly through some Instagram feed. "Oh, okay. That's nice." I gritted my teeth at the indifference but forced a casual tone. "You know, I could get you a ticket too. It might be fun for us to spend some time together out of town." She hesitated, then offered a weak smile. "I'm sure it's going to be all boring work stuff, right? I'll probably just stay here and relax." "Right, of course." I nodded, trying not to let the satisfaction creep into my voice. She was already taking the bait. Over the next few days, I laid it on thick. I printed out fake conference materials, made a big show of packing my suitcase, and even confirmed my flight information while Emma was within earshot. By the time Friday rolled around, she was practically pushing me out the door. I could see the excitement in her eyes, that barely concealed glee that told me exactly what she had planned the moment I was gone. I wasn't actually going anywhere, of course. But she didn't need to know that. After leaving for the airport, I drove a few blocks away, parked in a quiet lot, and took out the second phone I'd been using to monitor the back porch camera. Sure enough, within an hour of my departure, Alan was there, standing by the fence, his eyes scanning the yard like some kind of lovesick teenager. Emma appeared not long after, her hair done up in that annoyingly perfect way, her outfit just a little too flattering for a casual chat. I watched as they spoke for a while, and though I couldn't hear their words, I could see the way Emma's hand brushed against his arm, the way Alan leaned in just a bit too close. And then, like clockwork, they made their way inside my house. The rage that simmered inside me was hard to suppress, but I kept it at bay with the knowledge that this was all going according to plan. Let them think they had the run of the place. Let them make themselves comfortable. They had no idea what was coming next. While they were inside, doing whatever it was they were doing honestly, I didn't want to think too hard about it. I headed to my next destination, the hotel. Not the one for my conference. Mind you, but a lovely little spot downtown where I'd booked a room under a fake name. The room was just part of the setup. The real action would come later. Once I was checked in and settled, I pulled out my laptop and began to work on the piece de resistance of my plan, the digital breadcrumb trail. I had access to Emma's social media accounts, thanks to some clever snooping I'd done earlier in the month. Nothing illegal, mind you, just a bit of password guessing based on her not-so-secret obsession with her childhood pet, Muffin. People are surprisingly predictable when it comes to passwords. Using her accounts, I started to plant the seeds of a romantic weekend getaway between her and Alan. A few private messages, carefully constructed to look like they'd been sent by her, arranging a weekend rendezvous at a secluded bed and breakfast just outside of town. I even made sure to include some playful innuendo, something that would be just embarrassing enough to make them squirm when it inevitably came to light. The next step was setting up the trap at the hotel itself. I called ahead and made sure the room was stocked with all the essentials for a romantic evening: champagne, candles, the whole 9 yards. I even arranged for a photographer, a professional paparazzo who owed me a favor from years ago, to stake out the hotel, ready to snap some incriminating shots of Emma and Alan when they arrived. Not that they ever would. But the photos would add to the illusion, creating the perfect paper trail for the grand finale. By Saturday morning, everything was in place. I spent the day monitoring the cameras, watching as Emma and Alan moved around the house like they owned the place. They were so confident, so sure that I was miles away, oblivious to their little affair. It was almost laughable. And then came the final phase. I waited until just after sunset before sending Emma a carefully crafted text message from my burner phone. It read, "Hey babe. Conference wrapped up early. Thought I'd surprise you with a little getaway for the rest of the weekend. Meet me at the Mountain View Inn, room 212. I've got everything set up, winky face. Can't wait to see you." It was almost too easy. About 20 minutes after sending the message, I saw Emma glance down at her phone, her eyes widening in surprise. She quickly excused herself from Alan, who was lounging on the couch with a smug grin, and hurried upstairs to her bedroom. I watched through the cameras as she began to frantically pack a bag. She was clearly torn. How could she ditch Alan without making it seem suspicious? Eventually, she came downstairs, bag in hand, and told Alan that she had to run a last-minute errand. Alan, the smug bastard, didn't seem too concerned. He probably figured she was just covering her tracks for when I got home. Emma kissed him on the cheek, and I could feel my blood boiling again, but I kept my cool. She left the house, got into her car, and drove off toward the hotel. Alan stayed behind, lounging in my house, thinking he had the place to himself for a while. Poor guy. I gave it about 30 minutes before making my move. I pulled into the driveway, parked the car, and walked into my house like I owned the place because, well, I did. Alan was lounging on the couch, his feet up on my coffee table, casually flipping through the channels on my TV. The look of shock on his face when he saw me standing in the doorway was absolutely priceless. "Hey there, Alan," I said with a grin that I couldn't quite keep out of my voice. "Enjoying yourself?" He sat up, his face pale, trying to stammer out some kind of explanation, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. I wasn't here for him. Not yet. "I think you've overstayed your welcome," I continued, taking a step closer. "Why don't you go on home, huh?" Alan didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his shoes and bolted out the door, too scared to even look me in the eye. Once he was gone, I sat down on the couch, pulled out my phone, and sent the final text to Emma. "Change of plans. I'm home." The next few hours were some of the most satisfying of my life. Emma didn't return until nearly midnight, looking frazzled and panicked, no doubt having realized that she'd been set up. But by then, it was too late. The cameras, the fake texts, the photos that were already on their way to being uploaded online, it was all coming together. She tried to act normal when she walked in, but the look on my face must have given it away. She froze in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "Where have you been?" I asked, leaning back casually on the couch. I was just," she stammered, but the words died on her lips. "You know," I said, smiling. "It's funny. I've been watching everything. And I mean everything. Alan, the texts, the flirting by the fence. It's all recorded. I've even got a lovely little getaway planned for you online. Room 212, Mountain View Inn. Sound familiar?" Her face strained of color. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came out. "That's right," I continued. "You've been caught. And don't worry, Alan's in for a surprise too." I stood up, grabbing the small envelope I'd prepared from the coffee table and handed it to her. "Divorce papers. I've already signed them. I'll be moving out tomorrow. You can stay here with Alan if he'll have you. But I've got a feeling his life's about to get a lot more complicated." And with that, I walked out, leaving her standing there in shock, clutching the envelope like it was a ticking time bomb. Because, in a way, it was. Chapter 3: Checkmate. Walking out of that house, my head held high, was satisfying, but the best part was yet to come. You see, Emma and Alan thought they had slipped through the cracks unnoticed, like a pair of high school sweethearts sneaking behind the bleachers. But they weren't prepared for how deep I'd gone, how far I was willing to take this. I hadn't just planned to expose them, I planned to make their lives fall apart, piece by delicious piece. I slept like a baby that night. I figured Emma didn't. After all, she was left standing in the doorway with a look on her face that reminded me of a deer caught in the headlights. As for Alan, well, I imagine he probably had a sleepless night too, wondering what was coming next. But they didn't have to wait long to find out. The next morning, I moved swiftly, methodically, like someone ticking items off a very satisfying to-do list. First, I sent an email to Emma's boss. Nothing too dramatic, just a few screenshots of her private messages to Alan. The ones I had carefully planted, mind you, showing her excitement about the romantic weekend at the Mountain View Inn. Oh, and a few photos that my handy photographer had managed to snap of Emma's car outside the hotel, with the timestamp conveniently matching when she was supposed to be working from home. Emma worked at a law firm, and her boss, a no-nonsense type who thrived on moral superiority, wasn't exactly the forgiving kind. The firm had a strict, moral conduct clause that every employee had to sign when they started. It wasn't just about doing your job. It was about looking the part of a responsible, respectable lawyer. And Emma? Well, let's just say that sleeping with a neighbor and taking secret weekend getaways didn't exactly scream moral integrity. I didn't have to wait long for the fallout. By the end of the day, I heard through mutual friends that Emma had been called into a meeting with her boss and the HR department. They didn't fire her on the spot, but she was placed on administrative leave while they investigated the situation. Of course, I knew what the investigation would uncover. Those messages were damning enough to ensure she wouldn't be getting a paycheck anytime soon. I allowed myself a little smirk when I heard the news. But that was just the beginning. Next, I turned my attention to Alan. Alan was a bit of a local hero, if you can believe it. He owned a gym in town, one of those upscale places where the clientele was full of Instagram influencers and people who thought a single session with a personal trainer could magically transform them into Greek gods. Alan, with his perfect smile and abs, was the face of the place. His social media presence was all about fitness and living your best life. You know the type: endless motivational quotes, pictures of smoothies, and perfectly lit workout videos. Alan wasn't just the guy next door, he was the guy people wanted to be. But Alan had a secret. Well, he had a secret. Now, thanks to me, he had a scandal. I took the same set of photos I'd used with Emma, her car outside the hotel, a few carefully crafted screenshots of their messages, and I made sure they landed right in the inbox of every gossip blog, local news outlet, and most importantly, Alan's business partners. I even included a few extra touches, like a blurry shot of Emma and Alan standing a little too close by the fence, their body language screaming that something more than lawn care tips was being exchanged. I knew the local press would eat it up. There's nothing they love more than a scandal, especially one that involves a public figure like Alan. Sure enough, within a day, the story was everywhere. Local gym owner caught in cheating scandal. Splashed across websites, blogs, and social media. Alan's Instagram account, usually flooded with heart-eye emojis and likes, was suddenly filled with angry comments and accusations. The fitness community turned on him fast, which was the kind of poetic justice that made me laugh out loud as I scrolled through the posts. But the real kicker? Alan's gym was partially funded by his ex-wife's family, who had invested a sizable chunk of money into making it the trendy place it was. And if there's one thing they despised more than losing money, it was public embarrassment. As soon as the story broke, they pulled their funding, leaving Alan scrambling to explain why his business was about to go belly up. Poor guy. And yet, this wasn't just about ruining their lives financially or professionally. It was about making them face each other in the wreckage. Watching their relationship, if you could call it that, crumble under the weight of everything I'd set in motion was the real payoff. Emma had always been the type who thrived on appearances. She needed everything to look perfect: the perfect house, the perfect husband, the perfect career. She'd played the role of the ideal wife, but once her mask slipped, she'd been sloppy. Too sloppy. And now, her carefully constructed life was falling apart, and she had nowhere to hide. I'd made sure of it. The next part of my plan was both simple and genius. I waited until the worst of the public storm had passed, and then I sent Emma and Alan an anonymous letter. Not a handwritten note that would have been too easy to trace, but a carefully typed and signed letter that simply read, "I know everything. And so does everyone else. You played with fire, and now you're burned. Consider this a warning, it's not over yet. Your secrets aren't as safe as you think." I mailed the letter to Emma's office, knowing full well that she was already under the microscope there, and to Alan's gym, right after his business partners pulled out. They were both on edge, and this little note would push them further into paranoia. They would start to question each other, wondering who had spilled the beans, who had set them up. It would fracture whatever bond they thought they had. And just like clockwork, they did exactly what I expected them to. It wasn't long before word got back to me through one of my mutual acquaintances, the kind who lived for drama and couldn't resist updating me on the latest neighborhood gossip, that Emma and Alan had started arguing. Big time. Emma blamed Alan for being careless, for getting them caught. Alan, naturally, turned the tables and accused her of dragging him into a mess that could have been avoided if she hadn't been so eager to flaunt their affair. Of course, I had planned for this. The beauty of their downfall was that neither of them knew the full extent of what I'd done. They didn't know about the cameras, the burner phone, the fake texts. All they had was a crumbling relationship built on lies and the public humiliation they'd brought on themselves. I'd merely given them a little push over the edge. One evening, a few days after the story broke, I decided to drop by the house. Not because I wanted to see Emma, I had no interest in her anymore, but because I wanted to collect a few personal items before officially cutting ties with my old life. I didn't expect anyone to be home, but as luck would have it, I heard shouting as soon as I pulled up in the driveway. Alan's voice boomed from inside the house, and I could hear Emma shouting back at him. I stood there for a moment, listening to them tear each other apart, each one trying to shift the blame onto the other. It was poetic, really. Here they were, thinking they were the clever ones, sneaking around behind my back, and now their entire world was crashing down around them. I knocked on the door, and after a few moments, Emma opened it. Her face was flushed, her eyes puffy from crying. She looked at me with a mix of anger and fear, as if she still couldn't quite believe I was the one pulling all the strings. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Just came to grab a few things," I said, giving her the kind of smile you reserve for someone you're about to crush in a game of chess. "You know, to tie up loose ends." Alan appeared in the hallway behind her, looking just as frazzled. His face was pale, his usual cocky demeanor replaced with a nervous energy that made him seem much smaller than usual. "Look," he started, but I held up a hand to stop him. "I'm not here to talk," I said, stepping past them and heading for the stairs. "You two have plenty to discuss without me." I grabbed what I needed from the bedroom, just a few personal items that I hadn't bothered to take with me the first time I left, and as I walked back downstairs, I paused at the front door. I turned to face them, and for a moment either of them spoke. They just stood there, their expressions a mix of confusion, anger, and something else, something like defeat. "You know," I said, glancing between the two of them, "I could have confronted you the moment I knew what was going on. But where's the fun in that?" Emma opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't let her. "I wanted you to feel this," I continued, my voice calm, almost friendly. "I wanted you both to know exactly what it feels like to have your lives fall apart. Piece by piece." Alan shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Emma as if looking for some kind of support, but she didn't meet his gaze. She was too busy staring at the floor, her shoulders slumped in defeat. "And now?" I smiled, pulling the front door open. "Now I'm done." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me, leaving them in the wreckage of their own making. As I walked back to my car, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. It wasn't about the revenge, though I'd be lying if I said it didn't feel good. It was about regaining control, about taking back the power they thought they had over me. They played their little game, but I played it better. Checkmate. Chapter 4: The Aftermath. When you've set a well-planned trap and watched it spring, there's a certain satisfaction in walking away, knowing you've won. But that wasn't the end for me. It couldn't be. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but closure, that's something else entirely. As I drove away from Emma and Alan, the wreckage of their lives behind me, I couldn't help but think about what came next. Not for them, mind you. Their future was a well-lit path straight to rock bottom. No, I was thinking about me, what my life would look like now, without the weight of betrayal hanging over my shoulders. In the days that followed, the gossip mill churned at full speed. Emma and Alan's affair had become neighborhood legend, the kind of scandal people whispered about over backyard fences and at school drop-offs. Emma had gone from being the polished, perfect lawyer wife to the cautionary tale of how appearances can deceive. Alan, once the beloved gym god, was now nothing more than the idiot who blew up his life for a married woman. I'll admit, I took a bit of pleasure in knowing that their reputations were in tatters, their futures uncertain. But the true final twist hadn't happened yet. That was still coming. For a few days, I kept a low profile. I spent some time at a hotel while finalizing the paperwork for a new apartment. It wasn't the same as the house, of course, but it felt like a fresh start. A place where I didn't have to look out the window and see Alan preening next door or hear Emma's suspiciously friendly laughter drifting through the open kitchen window. It was my space now, no longer tainted by the stench of lies. I hadn't heard from Emma since I handed her those divorce papers. I imagined she was too busy trying to salvage whatever scraps of her career she could. A mutual friend, more of an acquaintance, really told me that Emma's law firm had quietly terminated her. It wasn't the kind of firing you hear about in the news, but more of a "you should probably resign before this gets messy" situation. Either way, she was out of a job. The life she had worked so hard to build was crumbling, and for someone like Emma, losing her reputation was almost worse than losing her job. Alan, meanwhile, had shut down his gym for renovations, which was code for "I've lost my funding and can't pay my employees." His Instagram, once a constant stream of motivational posts, had gone dark. The influencers who used to flock to his gym for selfies and sponsored workout sessions were suddenly nowhere to be found. I'm sure Alan's former investors, the ones who were connected to his ex-wife, had made sure he felt the sting of his actions, not just in his wallet but in his social standing, too. I wasn't losing sleep over it. Karma, as they say, is a patient beast. But I wasn't quite done. There was one more part of the plan, something I'd been holding on to for just the right moment. You see, the internet never forgets. And once something is out there, it's out there forever. While Alan and Emma were busy trying to put out fires in their personal lives, I was preparing to drop the final bomb. Over the weeks I had spent gathering evidence of their affair, I'd also been building a little digital time capsule. A collection of their text messages, photos, and videos. Nothing explicit after all. I wasn't trying to break any laws, but enough to paint a clear picture of their betrayal. I had every winky face, every flirty comment, and even a few voice recordings of their more intimate conversations. All wrapped up in a neat little package, ready to be sent with the click of a button. I didn't just want Emma and Alan to suffer in private. No, I wanted them to be publicly accountable for what they'd done. And I knew exactly where to send this particular gift. It started with an anonymous email to a few key contacts in Emma's world, her old college alumni network, a couple of legal industry blogs, and of course, her parents. Not the kind of people you'd think would spread gossip, but when someone's career is built on their image as a professional, respectable person, a few well-placed whispers can do more damage than 1,000 social media posts. I made sure the email included a link to a website I'd set up, nothing too flashy, just a simple blog that contained the entirety of their affair, neatly documented with timestamps, text messages, and photos. Alan got the same treatment, but in a different way. I sent his little package directly to his gym's former investors and a few high-profile fitness magazines that had featured him over the years. His image was tied to his business, his brand, and in the world of influencers, reputation is everything. A scandal like this could kill whatever was left of his career. Then I waited. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. Within a day, the legal blogs had started posting speculative pieces about Emma, hinting at unprofessional conduct and ethical concerns. The alumni network was abuzz with rumors, which had a way of spreading like wildfire. Emma's name, once associated with success and ambition, was now linked to the kind of scandal that makes people question everything they thought they knew about someone. Alan, meanwhile, was facing a different kind of public trial. His investors had already pulled out, but now the fitness magazines that had once praised him were distancing themselves. Articles about the fall of a local fitness icon started popping up, accompanied by blurry photos of Alan and Emma, taken at my house and outside the hotel. Alan's social media, once his biggest asset, became a war zone of angry comments and lost followers. His brand was sinking fast, and there was no saving it. By the time the dust started to settle, I felt an unexpected calm. I had done it. I had completely dismantled the lives of the two people who had thought they could make a fool out of me. But what came next wasn't what I expected. One afternoon, as I was packing up the last of my things from the hotel, I received a text. It was from Emma. "Can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't respond right away. What could she possibly want to say? It wasn't like there was anything left to discuss. But curiosity got the better of me, so I agreed to meet her. Not at the house, though I wasn't setting foot in that place again. Instead, we agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown, somewhere neutral. When I walked in, Emma was already sitting at a small table by the window, staring into a cup of coffee like it held the answers to all her problems. She looked tired. Not in the way people look after a long day, but in the way people look after their entire life has been drained out of them. Her hair was pulled back into a messy ponytail, and she was wearing a hoodie, something I'd never seen her wear in public before. She looked smaller somehow. I sat down across from her, not saying anything at first. She glanced up at me, her eyes rimmed with red, like she'd been crying for days. "Thanks for coming," she said softly. I didn't respond. I just waited. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. "I don't even know where to start." "That makes two of us," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. I could tell she was struggling to find the right words, but I wasn't in any hurry to help her out. Finally, she spoke again. "I know I messed up," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I hurt you. I don't know how it got this far." I raised an eyebrow. "You don't know? Or you didn't care until you got caught?" She winced at that, but I wasn't going to sugarcoat it for her. She had to own this. "I cared," she said quickly. I didn't realize how much I was throwing away." I shook my head, leaning back in my chair. "Emma, you didn't just throw it away. You set it on fire and watched it burn. You lied. You cheated. And you let Alan waltz into our house like he owned the place. So forgive me if I'm not in the mood for a heart-to-heart." Her eyes filled with tears, and for a second, I almost felt bad. Almost. "I'm sorry," she whispered, wiping at her eyes. "I really am. I don't know how to fix this." I let out a long sigh. "You can't. This isn't something you can just apologize for and expect everything to go back to the way it was. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them." She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "I know. I didn't want it to end like this." I stared at her for a moment, wondering if she really understood the gravity of what she'd done. But I didn't have the energy to explain it to her. Not anymore. "This was never going to end well," I said finally. "You made sure of that." She didn't say anything, just nodded again, her gaze fixed on the table. After a few moments, I stood up, pushing my chair back. "I think we're done here, Emma. There's nothing left to say." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. But I didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, feeling lighter with each step I took. As I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, I realized something. Revenge might have been what started this journey, but it wasn't what I needed anymore. I had taken back control of my life, and that was enough. Emma and Alan could deal with the consequences of their actions. As for me, I was ready to move forward, without them. In the end, I didn't need a final confrontation or some grand dramatic moment. I had one long before that. And as I walked down the street, the sun on my face and the weight of the past lifted from my shoulders, I couldn't help but smile. Checkmate indeed.